To the section of our day where we're going to talk about long-range planning. Your Synod has been working with Kairos Consulting and Jeff Chelberg, who is one of their principals. I'm going to invite Jeff to come forward at this time, and he and I are going to take you through a journey of talking about long-range planning. So if we could throw up my PowerPoint, that'd be beautiful. And while we're waiting, I would like to have you just share on your tables, and we'll give you only about 30 seconds, but does your congregation have regular conversations about the distant future as opposed to what's happening next week? Ready, set, go. I'll just throw you in if you want to sit, and I'll just call you up. That's okay. Okay, I'm going to invite you back. So when we laid out the agenda, we knew that I might not be serving as your bishop when we had this report today. So we asked Pastor D. Peterson to be ready to do this if I was not serving as the bishop. But I'll be leading the event, and we're grateful for D. and other pastors' leadership in our long-range planning process. My wife Robin is an artist, and the other night she talked me into going to one of the things she does called Pinot and Paint, and I never paint, and I often go in and talk about her paintings, and she just wanted me to be a part of this thing where you go and you try to execute a painting, and then you drink a glass of wine to kind of help, right? And what I realized as we were doing this painting is I had no plan of where I was going or what I was doing, and I'll share the glorious failure with you someday on the e-news, okay? But today what we want to talk about is we want to talk about the fact that if in our congregations, if in our leadership, I know leadership word scares people, but if in our leadership of our congregations, we don't talk about the middle and the long and the short-term future, then we just do the things we've always done and we're not even evaluating what we're doing. So I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm so passionate. Please, technology. So I have resisted all the way through my journey of this assembly. I have resisted sharing any baby pictures. And when my grandson Liam was born, Carla Clawitter on our staff said, "Watch his feet." And so I only want to share his feet as a way of reminding us that the next generation is coming, and we are the ones who have the privilege of working with God's church so that our grandchildren, for Pete's sake, and our neighbors who we should be thinking about as well, that they might be a part of a church where the good news might be heard and where they may make a meaningful difference in their world. Next slide. Because the clicker's not behaving. So today we're going to talk about embracing God's, or equipping God's people and embracing God's future. I'm going to keep going to major in time, all right? So we have an equipping God. God has given each one of you different gifts. And if you had the privilege of serving as a bishop and visiting different churches every Sunday, you would begin to see that each congregation has distinctive gifts and distinctive challenges and distinctive opportunities. So God gifts us and equips us, and our forgiving and reconciling God is at work in our midst. Next slide. So I love this text from Paul. You may not know this, but I have the equipment room sign on my door to remind me as a bishop that one of my most important callings is to be equipping the saints for ministry. And if you know this text from Paul, you know he says, God gifts people differently. Some are apostles, some evangelists, some pastors, some shepherds. There's quite a list, and then it breaks into this. And why does God gift all of these people so differently in God's church? To equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ until all of us come to the unity of our faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to maturity, to the measure of the full stature of Christ. That's why God has gifted us. God is planting seeds in us and equipping us. And God calls us to do planning so that we might serve our mission field well. Next slide. So, I love this picture. Kristen Bakeberg on her staff, this is her family's truck. And I remember my grandpa was telling me about when the mail was delivered in a truck that had tracks that could go on its tires. But we don't use tools like that anymore. Next. And I love to go out in the barn, and some places on my family farm we have these old tools hanging on the wall. And I love to look at them. And some of those tools we still might use. Next slide. But a lot of our tools have changed. And then in our world, some things have really changed. Next slide. Because we had no tool like this on the farm that I grew up on that actually delivers herbicides and other things much more carefully than anything we had. And in our church, we're called to sort out which tools will serve the gospel well and which tools are not serving the gospel well. Next slide. So in your synod's life, we've got this planning tool that's on the table in front of you, and you have a sheet that has this icon on it. If you go into the planning tool that Larry Strenge and worked hard to build for our congregations, you should think of it not as an intimidating book of should, but you should actually think of it as a recipe book that would help you think about planning and the stages of planning. And since we suggest it's good for congregations, I want you to know your synod has been doing this. So the first slide is listening to our community. You know we like to talk about the three great listenings, right? Listening to God, listening to our neighbors, listening to our community, and listening to one another. Then in order to do discernment and to do planning, we need to be doing all three of those. So in your synod's life, we've been working on that. We've been working on trying to plant questions like, what's the greatest opportunity you could imagine to serve the gospel in your context? Or what's happening in your mission field? What's new? What's different? Where are the opportunities? What's changing? Because if you're as a congregation, if you're not reading your local context, you're going to miss opportunities. And I'm going to not talk about fear of survival, because I don't think that's the point. We're all called to be stewards of the gospel in our local mission field and in our lives of faith. And if we're not listening to our communities, we'll lose touch with serving the gospel in those places. Next. So I don't know if you like to read. I love to read this book, The Next America by Paul Taylor from the Pew Foundation, is just stunning. Because what happens in the church is a lot of time we just talk to and live our lives with church people. But this book will help you see the massive changes that are happening if you like to read. And if you don't, then I'll give you a short summary. So I have this colleague, his name is James Hazelwood. He's out in New England, and he's different than me. I mean, he drives a motorcycle, and he's kind of wild. And he's fearless about talking about things that are really moving in a way that I'm trying to learn from. But I know that all across the synod, he talked about these changes that are happening in our mission field. That the future for congregations will be less building-centered. That the future of congregations will be less structured because there are less people who like to be on committees and go to meetings and have time for it. That the future of the church is going to be more networks of people who are passionate about things, and that's what we're trying to do in our synod, build networks. That the future of the church is less programmed and more relational. And all of these slides will be up on your synod's blog by tomorrow. I'll get them up. And the last one is the future of the church is likely to be more lightweight and less low maintenance. Now, I wish I could have them here to teach this out to you because you would just find it fascinating. And you might want to take the lead of their synod for a council meeting where you just kind of open up a conversation. What they did at their assembly a couple of years ago was they invited 6 unchurched people from their synod to come and be a part of the conversation with the synod. You might want to invite 6 people from your congregation or 6 people in your community who are not connected with any church to come and visit with your council. So what's happening in your synod? Well, our joys are, if you haven't heard it, Wednesday night we are having great success in many of our congregations with programming that somehow fits the needs of our people. I have my anxieties about this. On the other hand, if people are hearing the gospel, experiencing community, and they're growing deeper in Jesus, how could we avoid it? We're having a sudden growth of a number of candidates approaching us. We're thankful. We've been praying for this. We're stunned. And we're excited about beginning to train a new generation of lay preachers because we've noticed that our lay preachers are growing more mature, and we want to keep growing the next generation of leaders. But we have concerns in our synods. We have a growing need for interims on our west side of our synod. We have had 8 to 9 of our 2-pastor congregations, like county seat churches, discern they can only afford to have 1 pastor in about the last 18 months. And then we have a number of congregations that are discerning their future about whether God is calling them to revitalize and redevelopment or whether they're called to gracefully close. So you probably have your hunches about what's going on in your mission field, and I want you today when you're driving home, I want you to talk about that. I want you to talk about what's God up to in your mission field. And when you go home and give your council report, you know, you can talk about a million things, but if you don't talk about we need to begin to figure out how to plan, you'll have missed it today, because this is what I want you to take home. And your synod staff has been out doing something the synod staff of the past did. We go out and we visit with pastors and with lay leadership in congregations. It takes a whole day, all of us, and we've been trying to do this. We've visited 4 conferences. We'll try to get to 2 or 3 this year, but we're interested in learning what we can find. So how would your congregation do intentional listening? One synod has their whole council rent a 15-person van, and they go drive around their community, and they systematically visit with community leaders to listen to their community. But what we've been working with is Jeff Chelberg from Kairos Consulting, worked with us on what we've called the Listening Project, and I'm going to invite Jeff to share some of what he has learned. Thank you, Jeff. Let's give him a hand for his work with us.
Thank you, Bishop. It's been a great privilege to work with your synod, to work with your leadership, to work with Bishop Jon. I'm very grateful in his re-election because we've developed such a great working relationship and partnership, and imagining now what this next year is going to bring is very exciting. I do have a question. Is that New England bishop riding his motorcycle with Bishop Hoyme to the National Youth Convention? Is he one of those 3?
Yeah, and I've decided it would not be a wise thing for your bishop who doesn't know how to ride a motorcycle to try to do that. But yeah, if you'd like to give money to help, I think it's water for the world, if I remember right, yeah, you can go give a donation. But yeah, Jim Hazelwood, there's another one too. The newest bishop from West Virginia is going to be driving a motorcycle, I understand, as well. But yeah, he is. So Rick Hoyme, who used to be in our synod, who was here yesterday, yep, you've got it.
And I understand you're starting a movement of bishops to drive tractors to Detroit.
Well,
the new kind of tractor.
I could do that, but no, I haven't been imagining that in my calendar, though. But that would have been a good idea.
Yeah, that would take a few
We are having a blue outhouse go that's being used to raise money for world hunger from Kirkhoven Lutheran, I hear.
Well, anyway, I'm Jeff Chelberg. I'm the owner of Kairos that's been working with you, and I'm just going to share a few words with you I think that are important for you to hear. Our investment together with Kairos and the Synod was to do deep listening. As the Bishop has talked about, you really shouldn't do any planning and decision-making until you first deeply listened to your constituency. And so we did that, and we had an excellent response from you as participants, as members of this Synod. We had a survey that we sent out that over 800 people responded to, which was fantastic, and I interpreted that with your Synod leadership. We had over 150 people participate in bishop summits. We met with council, Synod council people, we met with Synod staff, and I think I saw on the tables there is this initial report that we generated that says draft on it. And the reason it says draft is after we did this initial phase of listening, we learned there were some things we still needed to hear. And so we established another Bishop Summit for just area parishes leaders, and we are going to be doing some things around young adults as we continue to learn from your synod. But just a few things you need to hear about yourself that we discovered in this process. And I want you to know I work with synods all over the country. And it's exciting work, it's challenging work, and you are not all the same. And in my experience with Southwest Minnesota Synod, I've discovered you to be a very vital, healthy synod. And that is good news for you. But a couple of the discoveries, first and foremost, with all that kind of participation in this listening, you've said very clearly that you care. You care deeply about what Synod is doing, your relationship to that. You are not indifferent. And we know that indifference can be life-threatening to any organization. So you care deeply. You are very healthy. You are engaged in the life of this ministry and mission. And probably most significantly, there is a deep level of trust, not just in your Synod office, but in your Synod leadership. And trust is foundational for any organization to do any kind of meaningful work together. So that was core. A couple of other things identified in terms of yearnings, and that's what we look for. We don't look for where are people complaining or being crabby or discontent. We look for where are yearnings happening. And as the bishop said in his second part of his report, this is kind of a season of looking at equipping. And that was one of the deepest longings and yearnings that we identified in our listening, is that you want that experience of equipping. You have the equipping day, but you want to go much deeper. And so there is a longing, a yearning to continue to discover new and exciting ways to equip. This has excited me. One of the core focuses you had is help us discover how to continue to be vital Lutheran congregations in our communities. That's exciting to me to hear that. We are proud of being ELCA Lutheran congregations in our contexts and in our communities. And so help us together learn how we can grow in being vital. And you're open to change. I always tell organizations, churches or synods, that when you're healthy and you have a high level of trust, you are poised to make significant changes and take risks and be willing to deal with the pushback that comes as a result of doing that. And so that's Southwestern Minnesota Synod. You're healthy, high level of trust. You have a deep longing to engage what changes are needed and desired in order to become something new and renewed into the future. And certainly you have challenges that are lifted up, but I just wanted you to hear those things in terms of what we discovered and why it's such an exciting time. It's why what we called it, the enabling resolution that happened yesterday, was so overwhelmingly affirmed. You're ready. You're ready to see what God's moving you into, and that's exciting, and that's what we learned in this listening stuff.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Now, it's been awkward because we believed this was important work to begin, but the closer we got to the bishop's election, the more we felt like we had to be careful and slow down and just be careful about it's very difficult to know how to lead while you're also in a call process. So today we're sharing things with you that have not been shared. These also will be posted on our blog in the coming days, and then we'll be talking more about this. So let me take you deeper into our next slide. So we've been working on identifying our assets and the possibilities because we're trying to figure out, I know the word strategy gets associated with war, but I don't know what a better word is, that you have to make decisions about what you're going to do and not do. Because the church often self-defeats itself by trying to do too much. and this bishop suffers from that sin as well. So we're trying to identify our assets that we have, thinking that God gave them to us for a reason, and then we're trying to identify the possibilities where we could make the deepest impact. Now, this, of course, is also what you should be doing in your congregations, I believe. So we've been working on that. Now, Pastor Barbara Peterson used to serve on our synod staff. I loved her when I was a young pastor. I still remember studying a text about the sheep, Jesus being the good shepherd, and she had us all crawling around in the synod office on our knees while we were singing a hymn together about sheep. So I'll never forget her, but she had this great line, "Gifts of God in human wrapping are all around us." And we need to look at the gifts of God in human wrapping, figure out who they are, identify what we have, and then make our decisions and move. As we've worked with Kairos, we've been invited to think about how we actually make decisions. A lot of times we make decisions by listening to certain people's stories. They're the certain people who like to talk. And if somebody is unhappy among those certain people, we often freeze, or we start to fight, or we even flee as leaders from the field because we don't want to deal with conflict. But in order to move forward your synod's life, and in order to move forward your congregation's life, we have to be willing to engage in significant conversation and handle constructive conflict. So we've been exploring observational intelligence. How can we gather information from as many people as possible, not just 10 people, not just 20 people, but from a lot of people about where the needs are. We've been doing it in a lot of different ways, and we've been learning things. We had the hunger event yesterday because our pastors repeatedly, in multiple times we asked them to tell us about what's new and a need in their area. They talked about hunger issues in their communities. And that was important for us to hear, but if we hadn't been asking, we'd have not heard it. So then we want to try to not make perfect decisions, we want to make good decisions. So Rick Torgerson was the president at Luther College, where my kids attended school, and he said you have to gather information, then you have to make a good decision. You don't try to get a perfect decision, because there is no such thing. And then as you make the decision, then you learn more, and then you can take another decision. So the third ray in the process then is clarifying your aspirations and sharpening your sense of goals. And again, I'd like to invite Jeff to share with us some of what you have learned.
Again, I work all over the country with synods, and so Bishop Jon and I talked about observations that I'm seeing as synods, congregations are going through this listening and discerning stuff. And a few things that are really important. I want you to hear, and you may have heard it already, but the church is not dying. Sometimes it feels like that. Sometimes it might even look like that. But in reality, God is alive and well, and the church is alive and well. It's just reforming. So I like to lift up, this is a reformation time. And that's difficult and challenging, but it's good news for us to embrace the fact that we are a part of that movement. Ironically, it's happening at the time of our celebrating the 500th anniversary of the Reformation movement. But the church is not dying. It's in a place of reformation, and that is good news, challenging news, opportunity, and a variety of things. The other thing that I'm observing as I work with synods is it's not just we are church together, but I'm hearing people say we are better together. When we understand that it isn't just little silos of mission posts working out there, but when we are together yoked to a common mission, we can do greater things knowing that God is at work in our midst. And I'm seeing that language appear all over the country where synods are coming together with leaders and congregations are saying we need to come together and we will be better as a result of that. That is good news. That has not always been the case. And to know that that's emerging, that people are understanding we have to come together to be this church, and then as a result, we are not dying. So also this idea of flattening synod, that it's not the synod up there or over there, and we look to the synod to come in and enter into our context, but the synod is you. And that's an emerging metaphor for synodical mission, is that it's flattening. And that means all of us have to be seen as ministers in this. We have roles, we have skills, we have assets that we bring to bear, and that is key. Also, there's no roadmap. There is no bullet point that I can share with you that says if you just follow these 5 steps, you're going to be renewed, transformed, reformed. We don't know exactly what it looks like. But when we take on this task to say we can be better together, we are church together, that we all bring giftedness into this, that we're healthy, that we're willing to take risks, some exciting things can happen, and we'll discover those. And finally, as Bishop Jon was referencing, we know it's not new news that we need to equip leaders and churches to bring resources to help assist and walk along. But the real challenge is, how does that look in this 21st century? And one of the tools that we're bringing and going to imagine now over this next year is, as we did this survey with the Synod, over 800 people, we have an assessment tool that we can bring to bear for individual congregations. And by doing this assessment with congregations, we discover things that we never knew. A lot of the work that the Synod does tends to be, and this isn't a slam on synods, but we tend to assume that we know what's going on. We assume what's happening, and we assume what they need. Well, this is a whole new way of engaging congregations, assessing their context, and bringing that kind of data and information to the Synod level to then help understand how can we best equip and best resource based on what we know out of this data. And I just did this in Southeast Pennsylvania Synod. 27 churches were our pilot program, and it already, within 3 months of doing this, has been transformational for those congregations and those Synod leaders as they're learning things that they never knew and are able to enter in ways that they never thought they could, and they can align resources based on the needs that they've discovered. It's a new way in which we're going to be approaching how can we best do this equipping and resourcing.
Well, thank you, Jeff. We'll be talking more about this in the days to come, but we believe we have to find new levers. I hurt my back last summer, and I've learned I can't lift as much with my back unless I use a lever. If I get the right bar, I can move all kinds of weight. I have to learn to do things smarter instead of just brute work, right? So we're trying to figure out how to help you all in a smarter way. Now, I'm going to finish up this report because I see where we are in time, and I know I shouldn't talk about time in a report. Next one. Next slide. So Jeff has already talked to us. So our tentative name for our project is Equip God's People, Embrace God's Mission. And you'll hear more about that as we continue to work on it. Next slide. So the next step, it says, is you have to align your resources. You have to figure out what your hunches are and where you want to move, and then you need to bring your energy to work on that. Next slide. So the Lilly Grant is just this amazing experience of sheer grace that helps us, that actually we thought about whether or not we should receive it, because if it's not in alignment with our gifts, we shouldn't. If it's not in alignment with what we need to do, we shouldn't. We think it's just sheer grace, and we're thankful for it. You'll be hearing more about that next. And then we have to activate our plan next. And we have to make strategic decisions next. And this is a slide I wanted to go to, because when I was growing up, we often would talk about, well, we're going to bet the farm on this. And it was not a light line, right? So if you only get one move to shape the future of your synod's life, if you get one decisive strategic lever to move, what is the lever you should move? We're continuing to do listening. We're going to do more assessing. But right now, our hunch as leaders is we have to bet the farm on deepening the equipping of our lay leadership in a number of different dimensions while sustaining the equipping of our rostered leaders. Next slide. And then we've got to gauge our process. Next slide. And I'm going to go to the next slide. So anybody know what this is? Don't say it if you do. What do you think this thing is? Pick out something in your head. Just lock up in your mind, what do you think this is? Next slide. So in Japanese culture, when beautiful porcelain was broken, they began to build a tradition of either using actual gold, if they were rich, or gold dust on the outside of the porcelain that they would use to repair a broken bowl. And now this form of pottery, which Pastor Mari could probably talk about and pronounce better than I do because she served there for a while, this form of pottery has become a beautiful, powerful image for me as I think about our church and even about our faith. Because we are people who knows that God can take the brokenness of human sin and the brokenness of the cross, the destruction of the Savior who was sent into this world, and God can turn it into something golden. And we as a synod have faced significant challenges. I can't be in this room without remembering hard days we were here together. But I trust this is exactly what God is doing. God is taking our brokenness as a synod, as people, and God is finding ways to make something even more beautiful out of us and out of your congregations and out of your lives. So I want to invite you to join me in praying that God might continue to do God's amazing work of bringing us back together and making us even more beautiful in spite of our pain, in spite of our challenges. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jeff.